Hello everyone, I'll just do a quick introduction of myself and my organization. My name is Masoud and I am the Director of Education and Training at Diversity Awareness Partnership, like Cameron mentioned. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I have been working with DAP for about 4 years now, but have been doing DI work for a lot longer, kind of before I knew it was a career even. And we do a lot of different types of services, all the way from facilitating conversations like these to trainings and workshops around specific topics. We like to tackle a lot of issues around social identity, so having conversations around race and racism and bias, and a lot of those topics that are difficult to talk because they're so stigmatized. And so I'm excited to unpack. There's so much in this 1 hour play, and talk with you all about some of the themes that come up, because this play was written as a social commentary on race and racism and race relations at that time period. So I'm excited to hear your thoughts.
As someone who discovered this play at the age of 19, I think being young and passionate, I identified a lot with the fervor, the passion, and just like the quote unquote rage of it. But that's because I had a lot of feelings. And then it would take time to start to show me a little bit more about what this play would be about on a social context. I would say within a year is when the Trayvon Martin situation would happen. And that would be an eye-opener. And then maybe 3 years later, Mike Brown here in St. Louis. That situation started to really just trigger my consciousness as a Black man in America. Not that I ever was not aware of that, but growing up, going to school in Clayton, attending a predominantly white institution, and living in a world where there was such a color filter where I didn't feel otherized. These situations where I saw Black death and the death of Black male bodies on a national context started to trigger that awareness in a way. And I kind of think that is one of the many things that this play is also getting at. When you see Clay simply as a man, and even his name being Clay, being this Adam figure in every man, but it's Lula who comes in and puts him into the context of a Black man. I feel he is just a man, and then when Lula comes on with her intentions, he then takes on a racial identity that he has to now bear to some degree.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that progression is really interesting that you talked about, from not necessarily unawareness, but maybe being in a bubble, to that awareness of kind of the extreme. And I think we see that in the play as well, because the play starts off like fun and flirty, right? And you don't really realize where it's going to go. And then as it progresses, you start hearing the racial slurs. And then as it progresses to the end, where Clay dies, Lula kills Clay. And so I want to pose to you all a question around this progression. How do you think that mimics the way our bias progresses in life?
Yeah, well, I'll tell you, it starts with like stereotypes, and just like stereotypes which, at least in my world, like some of them they're based in truth or come from somewhere, they just don't come out of the oblivion. But then you take a stereotype and then it almost like festers in your psyche and whatnot, and then it goes from a stereotype to like a prejudice, and then from a prejudice it starts to influence your actions and how you start to interact with people that you now have a prejudice against that you didn't even realize started to like accrue over time. And now you start treating people a certain way, not having gotten to know them at all.
Yeah.
It's I know I did zero homework before.
No, read it.
So because sometimes you want to have a completely fresh. Let's hear it for the first time in performance. I don't know if that's really what I wanted, but I did not do my homework. So I have been trying to sit here and watch it and take it in and figure it all out.
Mm-hmm.
First of all, what's interesting to me is it was plays written in 1964, but it looks like we replaced it in today. You have your cell phone, for example, and I can't help it about thinking in 1964 to have a white woman to be so sexually forward to anybody would have been taboo, let alone to a Black man. This play must have been extremely provocative in that regard. extremely provocative.
And I think another thing that we played with, and I know what my take is on it as the actor, but we tried to make it ambiguous to the audience. Is Lula actually a figment of his imagination, or is she actually there?
Yeah, I don't know.
Exactly. Yeah.
I don't know. I don't even know if the subway car is real or not. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's hard to know whether it's a trap. And the Dutchman, is the title of the play? Is that a reference to the ghost ship?
Mhm.
Okay, so I didn't. That's what I didn't know, if we were on a ghost ship or if we were on a
Dutchman.
Yeah, yeah, because they're the continuation of everything.
Everything.
Like my next bit.
Yeah, your next
just
is
like
you've got somebody else coming. It's just that you're almost like the spirit that haunts this, the ghost that haunts this Dutchman.
Mm-hmm. So we kind of wanted people to take what they personally take out of the show too, and interpret it the way that it speaks to them too.
Oh, there's a lot that you could. There's a lot to chew on.
Yeah. What did you all think about Clay's monologue and the progression in the monologue as well? Because it kind of, at the end, that's where he's just at his wit's end, right? About his feelings around race and, you know, how he feels around accepting race relations at that time and how it is between white folks and black folks.
I think that's the author presenting his own points of view.
Another thing the author pointed out is it's not just like generalizations for these characters, they're just specific people that he wrote.
Yeah.
And so he made sure that it wasn't like, oh, this is all white people and this is all black men or, you know, whatever. It's very specific in the story.
Which is actually liberating as the actor to take that in, to know that these characters are not meant to be figureheads representing the totality of Black and white America, that they get to be distilled down to two human beings in an encounter, and then leave the rest of the passengers on the train and our audience to take what they will.
In the speech that Lula has at the top of the second half, where they're talking about what's happening, they go to the party, and you meet another man like me, like you, who's with another woman like me, and we'll exchange these glances and snickers and blah, 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 blah. And it's like, what is the unspoken agreement between those types of couplings, even when they're out in public, and what is the relationship, or is it a relationship, or is it just a statement? Because it kind of robs what a relationship is.
She's kind of always assuming she's in charge of what's going to happen.
There is a power, definitely a power element where she does. I felt that same thing, almost at the gate. Even though I thought Clay, at the beginning, I felt that Clay thought he was going to be in charge of this. You're a male, you're a man, and you're college educated, and here's this sexy, whatever you are,
Sexy, sprightly thing.
And there's, I think there's at the beginning there's a sense that you're going, oh, she's flirting with me, but
Right, there's a definite shift in there about halfway through where it's a male and female thing, and then
it
all of a
changes.
sudden it becomes black and white. And I think that's at the point where Lula starts figuring out which buttons to press to get the response that she wants. It's interesting. Have you guys worked together a lot? Are you friends?
We've never worked
We've never worked together.
No, but you have to trust one another to do this kind of thing.
But that's why it works that we're friends.
And that's what I was going to say. And do you think it makes it easier to perform since you are friends than if you were coming in cold with somebody else you didn't know?
1,000%. 1,000%. I knew when we even picked up this play that it would be someone I would need to trust the fellow person so we both could pursue it with the fearlessness and the boldness that it required. And we were just talking now that it's open, if people have very strong reactions to it, we are almost desensitized to a degree.
Yeah, I think there was a lot of careful approaches to the material, and I think even that was a little like at times, but it would have been even worse if I didn't know you. I'd be like, I cannot feel comfortable with this, you know.
How are you all able to like handle that in the rehearsal process, like building that trust and being able to step in and out of these strong situations and keeping the rapport?
I think all the discussions we had, like with Zaria and everything, I think that really helped bring a different light to everything, and I was able to approach it more openly than otherwise.
Yes, I quickly want to introduce our dramaturg for the production, Miss Zaria Moore, who kicked off our first rehearsal, giving us a deep dive into Amiri Baraka, his work, and the symbolism that is latent in this show, to really put our focus there and honoring that dramatic intent. And if you wanted to speak more on that.
I was like, yes, because I was like, at one point I was like, yeah, I should probably say something and be like, oh, hi y'all. Yes, as Cameron said, I'm the dramaturg for the production, and a lot of people kind of don't really know what a dramaturg is, but so my function on Dutchman is to provide like historical context. So you'll see like on the back of this wall, like I have a display with like some of the context that I found in relating with Dutchman. But I also help with character study and like helping to connect some of these dots with the audience with the use of display and also like coming here. But yeah, I thought it was really important in the process, like early on, because my entry point into Dutchman was in college as well. When I was 18, Dutchman is a really big part of like Black theater history curriculum, specifically as we transition from the civil rights movement to, and like the Black theater that's being created and during that time, to the Black arts movement, which was known for having a more grounded Black Africanist aesthetic with certain things that talk about like violence and specifically related to the Black Power movement. So it was really important for me when we first came into this play that they understood the context from which this play was situated, because it's taking place during, like I just tell them on the first day, I said, Malcolm X is still alive during this period. Martin Luther King is still alive during this period. And this is happening in New York at the time. Amiri Baraka was actually married to a white and Jewish woman at the time. So this is also like keeping in mind, so this is the context of which this show is happening. So like, wow, there's a movement that's happening primarily in the South. You know, Amiri Baraka is chilling with his buddies over Bohemian tea and poetry in New York in the Village. So, and when we think about it in that context, it really changes how we look at the play.
Let's get into some of the racial stereotypes, since that's kind of what I'm hearing right now. How does the play either challenge or reinforce certain racial stereotypes that we see today?
Well, there was the Black man that's always trying to climb and go to the next level, and then because there's so many different stereotypes in every demographic, and then there was the overly sexualized white woman stereotype, the girl who probably maybe on the Upper East Side, or she may be strolling down 42nd Street, who knows what she's doing in New York. Both very strong stereotypes of a very specific people, but not really still. They're stereotypes, but they're not like the predominant stereotypes for either demographic I see for the time period, or even now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it almost felt like stereotypes that people only talk about within their specific ethnic groups, right? Like the other ethnic group wouldn't necessarily know that that's a stereotype about them, because it's only talked about within a certain space. Like, people of color or Black folks talking about it in that space, or white folks talking about it in their space, when there's no other Black people or people of color around, which I thought was interesting.
I also thought when Lula starts speaking on Clay's attire, that's a certain affirmation of a dichotomy of stereotypes. She clearly sees this is a Black man who's not dressed necessarily as, a farmer or a blue-collar worker. She sees a man in a suit and a tie, which that gives a certain...
A three-button suit.
A three-button suit.
Which I don't... I was too young to know I was alive, but I was too young to know. But a three-button suit at that time was different than a two-button suit.
Yes.
It meant
Yes.
something different.
Mm-hmm. And also, it's the line of what right do you have to be wearing that?
A 3-button suit. And I would have to look into it, but I want to say a 3-button suit was considered, I think, more professional, like to attorneys, things like that. Bankers
That's
would
a
wear
higher
3-button
level,
suit. A 2-button suit would be a little.
Mm-hmm. Well, and she finishes that speech with, your father, your grandfather was a slave, which is another stereotype and supposition. But
Is that a stereotype?
I mean, technically, my grandfather wasn't,
Well,
or at the time,
His grandfather, yes. What is it?
Probably
was more than like, yeah.
Not more than likely, he was.
He was, yeah.
There's so much that translated to a present day setting.
And we tried to make it.
But there were a few little things in there, like for example, the 3-button suit reference, and there were a couple other references that were very specific to
Time.
64.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm wondering if the N-word would have been as shocking as it is as it is then as it is now.
I feel like not.
Like,
Yeah.
I feel
where
like it would be.
where
More commonly used.
I
more
think
commonly
that-
used at that time.
Well, it's never really for real been shocking in the black community, unless it's been used. Unless it's been used against you.
Well, and that's the context, but also, I say this is like my grandmother, she was born in 51. She still has very strong feelings about even as her grandkids using the N-word, even if it's a hard ER or a hard A. I think that yes, the N-word, even in this context, is still like, because again, it's like, again, we have to think about who's saying it,
Yeah.
one, and how is it being directed towards him. Now, just because Clay doesn't react strongly at first to it being used towards him, doesn't mean that this word still has an impact. There are people being strung up in the South
Oh.
using this word. So that's why I'm like pushing back just a little bit. This word still
Well, it
has
was. I think it definitely, given that, had a
Yeah,
charge
terrible
to it.
negative charge to it. But I'm just wondering if it wasn't more commonly heard back then. Where that beginning scene, with just the idea of their relationship at all, must have been shocking in '64.
Mm-hmm.
And them associating with one, at all,
Mm-hmm.
must have been shocking. It's interesting how they, I see the same thing. So I'm gay, and I've been around, and a lot of gay men my age do not like the word queer. Do not like being referenced as queer because there was so much. It was used as a weapon
Right.
against people my age
Uh-huh.
in the '60s and '70s coming up. So
Yeah, I even
it's
used that.
yeah.
Yeah.
And even
Yeah,
when
and I know the whole idea of using the N-word and queer is to take that word back,
Right.
and turn it around.
And then he calls Lula a bitch at the end, which
Yeah.
women have, more recent
Hopefully.
generations have been trying to take
Take
that.
that
word.
Right.
That word.
But again, it's all about who is using the word.
Who's using it and what the context is and
context,
how it's
intention.
and 100%.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's interesting talking about stereotypes, how Cameron, you look at how you're dressed and you look like establishment and you're the one in control and you have this better life, and you look at Lula and you think either she's an airhead or she's not all there.
Sorry.
So there's
Yeah, she's here. She's good. She's here for a good time.
Yeah,
Party
this is
girl.
fun to Lula. Like, this is like her just nightly activity.
But
Like,
it's fun.
yeah, killing
As,
people.
as time goes on, and you make a comment about the apples, what do you have in those apples?
Mm-hmm.
Which I thought was funny. But as the show goes on, you guys change, and you start to become, well, the suit coat is off, the vest is off, and you kind of lose your control. You can see that starting, and she becomes much more assertive and aggressive in her attacks. And it finally culminates in the end of the play. But it's just interesting how you started versus how you could say that Lula was really a part of the establishment at that time, and you were on the outside looking in. Yet you appeared totally different. And I found that interesting.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think when I first meet Lula, it's like, oh, I don't have to take her seriously. She's not the type of woman
Yeah.
you would take seriously, or even give a certain level of respect based on how she presents and is dressed. And then you see that she means business. You take her very seriously by the end.
Because it is important to note that he beats her before she kills him.
Yes. That is true.
There is
There is
that.
There is that.
What do you think that says about the social power of whiteness?
Because I've heard from a lot of, mostly just hearing that comment, and I've heard that comment before, they've come from Caucasian patrons, when as a black man, by the time Lula got slapped, she had earned every bit of it.
Well,
There is that.
Yeah. But even I think even if that is the feeling, it's not until the actual moment happens where those stakes get notched up. And that is, the moment that by the time Clay does hit Lula, it's like there is no going back from anything.
To me, that was the point where I was like, and he just, exactly what you said, that's it, it's done.
But even before,
that's when Clay
he lost
it.
Yep. But that's when Lula relaxes. 'Cause
She
I
does. Lula
made my
gets struck, and Lula goes back there and has a Virginia Slim, or whatever.
I don't think that's what she wants to justify what she's about
to do, right?
Yeah.
She's
well,
over there.
I think there are maybe 3 meaningful moments of physical interaction in the piece, and the first is when they actually get physically close and he's touching her, and the way that he is caressing and seemingly possessing her. I think that also would have been taboo at the time.
Oh,
totally.
I think it would have been taboo for any couple on the subway at that time to be canoodling the way you're canoodling.
Yeah, and we hear that progression when he starts to notice, oh, there are people on the train now. People are watching us. Maybe let us alter this a little bit, or how do we stay in this moment? And then by the time the physical moments happen, all of that has kind of just gone out the window.
Yeah, and I think Clay, I'm speaking for Clay, but in Lula's mind, Clay is anticipating sleeping together, right?
Yeah.
Lula's not actually. If you notice, he touches my leg, but I pick his leg. Yeah, I'll take your hand, and it's all just subtle hints to where it's like, I'm not actually going to sleep with you, but I'm going to say that I am just to get you in my web. And I think that that's another layer of, he thinks he's getting away with touching, but he's really not, or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
We have to play into it just enough to convince him.
In the 70s, I think that this would have been very provocative in 64.
Mm-hmm.
Even in New
Well,
York.
yes, and it was. I think we shared the quote from the paper where it was, but there was a critic that commented on the piece in 64 and again commented on the provocativeness of the piece, also making a comment that if this is how black people really feel about white people, then there is really a concern that we do need to take a pause and really hasten for change.
So to think that a white woman could kill a black man on this, even though it's absurd, it wasn't that far removed from a time when, no, it's not that absurd.
Well, and that's why we wanted to keep it in this semi-ambiguous time frame. And I love that the usage of a cell phone puts us somewhere that we can access now. Because in 2022, there was a story of a black man named Christian Obumseli who was dating a white woman named Courtney Clinton. And he was known for ridiculing black women in his preference of white women. And she ended up stabbing him multiple times, murdering him while calling him racial slurs, and then was on TikTok essentially the next week creating new content because she got away with it. Mm-hmm. And this was in November of 2022.
Yeah. In Miami.
And so it really makes us think okay, we have progressed a lot. Things are getting better, but what things have remained the same? I think that this play has an interesting irony in that we needed a safe context for this dangerous moment to happen. The safety being we're on an underground subway where no one can see us, no one is on this train. It's late at night, so we're not in the proper light of day. We can do what we really want to do as opposed to what we have to do.
What do you all think about the bystanders and how that relates to how we're bystanders when we witness things that we should step in, but because of fear or because of not wanting to put ourselves in that situation, not wanting to be uncomfortable, we kind of back away from certain instances. Because technically there were other people on the train, because Clay says, oh, shoot, like there's other people coming on, right? So they could have seen the way that Lula was treating Clay and nobody did anything.
Because the other characters were complicit. I mean, they were just like, okay, regular day here.
And I would, in both extreme instances, because when Clay hits the drunk man, they're like, okay, that's two guys fighting, let's not get into that. But when Clay then slaps Lula, nobody jumps into that. Nobody, they allow that.
It's happened recently on the metro here. Not recent, I'm gonna say in the last few years. A man was violent to a woman, and then the other passenger on the train didn't do anything. But what do you do?
Yeah,
If you're not a security guard or if you're not a...
But
I
even
think
if it's not something that drastic,
Yeah.
people still are bystanders,
Yeah.
right? Even if it's just a comment.
There's that whole hidden camera
you know.
TV show about this, about what people do in these situations. Yeah, you always think, oh no, I would have been, I would have gotten up with that friend and said, hey, you keep your hands off that book, stop, but would I in your life, or would I be too afraid to do
You almost feel like it's not my place, even though at a certain point, I guess we have to realize or come to understanding that it's always our place. If something isn't right, it's just not right.
Well, I think outside of the risk of saying, well, is this my place, who am I to do this? When you do impact these situations, you open yourself up to the unknown.
Yeah.
What could happen to me now? And you have to be willing to take that risk on the front end.
I think it also is, because I think a lot of what Amir Baraka talks about, at least in his later philosophies, is like Black folks' own responsibility in these. Because Amir Baraka was a firm believer that we should not be bystanders to our own, not trauma, but when things are happening to us. Situations are happening to us. We should not just stand idly by. We should not be quiet, be submissive, be, and there's he writes a thing about what does nonviolence mean within the context of the civil rights movement. Because nonviolence was used as a tactic to create change within the civil rights movement. But in his essay on what nonviolence means, he begins with the images of we're saying nonviolence while the Ku Klux Klan is bombing the 16th Street Baptist Church and killing 4 little girls. We're saying nonviolence when they're hosing us down in the streets and people are filming it, and we're still going back. And he's like, so he believes that nonviolence keeps us within a specific status quo and keeps us as victims. And he's like, no, we should not be victims. We should stand up for ourselves. We should fight back. Because again, they are killing us. Clay makes the notion about the blues and specifically Bessie Smith and Charlie Parker, and saying, because the blues was used as a way to cope with the second-class citizenship and the trauma that is happening. But he's like, if Bessie Smith would have killed white folks, we wouldn't have to sing the blues. If Charlie Parker, and that's not to say that we preach violence here, but the idea of not standing idly by when someone is attacking you.
Well, it speaks to these bystanders, the idea that non-confrontation actually begets confrontation. Non-inaction, non-violence begets more violence. So you have to have a moment where you impact it to stop it. Otherwise, it will perpetuate. At least that's what I feel like I take away from that.
Yes, if you choose not to take action, what you've done is you've chosen to be on the side of the oppressor. This is a message from Larry Kramer. Of course, he was talking about gay rights and the AIDS epidemic. he also had the exact same position. That you have to stand up and be recognized and demand your rights and fight for them.
No one should be steamrolled over in general. You
No,
know what I mean?
yeah.
Like, you have to.
Controversial thought that popped into my head, but this feels like a safe space.
Somebody just got murdered.
It's like,
We're killing black guys right here.
I've had conversations and I've struggled with Amiri Baraka and his personal life and whatnot to be like, oh, stand up for black people, this, that, and the other. But then you end up marrying a white woman having like super biracial looking children who then might marry another white person. And then now 3 generations down the line, okay, so you got, this isn't back 1882 where it's like you have an eighth and you got to get off the train type whatever. It's like, no, now your children are new, getting to passing and all this stuff and colorism and everything. And it just becomes super complicated to where it feels like, in a sense, you might be contradicting your point based upon your actions, but also I'm not here to judge interracial relationships. I'm just making controversial observations.
I think ideology too, in theory, is a lot easier to talk about and believe in than to actually do yourself. Especially because there's also, you can believe all that, you can have the ideology, but is there that level of safety to actually enact it too, right? Like, you know, maybe he was in that relationship for a lot of other reasons that we don't know about. Or, you know, he wanted to act in a certain way, he wanted to act out his ideology, but maybe he felt like something would happen to him if he did, and so he felt like he had to put it in this play. There could be a lot of reasons.
Well, yes. So Amiri Baraka is he's a very colorful figure, okay? And I also want to also hone in that his personal philosophies changed over time, as a lot of ours do. When he was married to Hetty Cohn, who is still alive and has a book called Being Mrs. Jones. If any of y'all are interested, because his former name was Leroy Jones. Yeah, so if any of you would like to read her personal autobiography, she is still alive and it's, you know, I would recommend it. However, you know, during this time, his personal philosophy around race relations and the black art is shifting. This is actually considered one of his pre-revolutionary plays. When he gets to the Black Arts Movement, he becomes a lot more revolutionary. So just let that sit into context. But a big part of like what is happening in his life that's changing his political philosophy is specifically also during this time is the Cuban Revolution. And he was a part of other black artists who went to Cuba during this time, met Fidel Castro, and in giving his support for the movement. And while he was in Cuba, he was on a train when a person came up to him and said that, you know, that they wish that he was using more of his art to talk about social change and also talk about the issues that's happening in Cuba, as long with like in the United States. Because they felt like him writing his bohemian poetry and his beatnik poetry, he was not talking about race and these interesting constructs of like capitalism, communism enough. And so he starts writing plays to start working through these philosophies of like, what does him talking about these social constructs, these social interactions, what does that look like? And so I think in Dutchman, again, his pre-revolutionary work, he might be introspecting on himself, he's introspecting on society, but he's taking the time to feel like, what does he believe? And so I think that we need to give artists that grace.
No, the danger is in meeting someone as someone who won't change.
Yes.
And everyone has the right to make, has not just the right, they have the responsibility to change decisions.
To change, yes.
Yeah, and we also, and I think conversely, to offer the grace and the space for people to change, it's also very important. It's those people who hang on to certain ideas tenaciously. Those are the people that, to me, those are the red flags to me.
Yes.
Don't. And things have changed so much. My goodness, if he wrote this or this was produced in '64, how could your position not change as a young? How could you live at that time or any time?
His position would drastically change after the death of Malcolm X. So that is what pushes him into the Black Arts Movement.
Well, the Civil Rights Movement put a spotlight on racists and made it wrong to openly do more so. Racism throughout the 80s and 90s it's all right there underneath. It's all right there underneath. And then we get into the 2000s, and what do we have? We have these cell phones. We got these cell phones. That's why there's video out there, because all the stuff that black people have been talking about has been happening since the 60s, 70s, and 80s that no one believes us are. Oh, look, now we got proof. So now, yeah, maybe we're coming into another generation of race reckoning. But, you know, in reality, race is really just a construct made up by the rich people to divide the poor people, so that the poor white people don't get with the poor black people and fight the rich people. As long as you're white, you're better than the poor black people, and those black people and brown people are taking your jobs.
That guy over there is taking
everything else.
Well, you saying that speaks to what I think this play is about. You know, it's having cameras now, we're able to see. You said that the civil rights movement just made it unacceptable to be visibly racist and prejudiced in that regard. Hence, this play happening on a subway. No one outside of the people on this train would know that this interaction happened, and no one would even have to talk about it. So this could be a body that gets lost in the ether to some degree. And I think the play is kind of tapping at what is at the core of the American subconscious and the American identity. Outside of the politics, outside of dressing it up, what are we really still wrestling with? And, you know, having this conversation to kind of bring it all full circle so we can release y'all. The idea is, we wanted to present an entertaining, even though it's dark and challenging, you know, just something that is compelling and dramatically worthy and entertaining. But to have this conversation that is something about a divisive topic to show that we can still harmonize, come together and unify and come to a collective understanding as one people, as one nation, not only through art and, you know, dramatic, you know, content, but by having this conversation together, because it's not one side. We must speak together in order to come to truth.
I think it's definitely left me with a sense of reflection around, you know, my role and how I'm a bystander sometimes, even though this is the nature of my work, is to actively be an upstander, but we're human beings, right? And we all get sucked into our own biases. We all have our downfalls and those moments where we know we should have done something, we know we should have spoken up, but we just don't because of whatever reason. And to just reflect on that and reflect on our own personal biases and how that impacts us on a daily life in whatever spaces that we take up. And so that was also an eye-opener. So I just hope that you all also leave with that reflection and continue the conversation too and make sure it doesn't end.
Yes.
How's your work these days? Is it challenging? I know that the kind of work that you do is under attack.
Yeah, I think, it's challenging, and it's always been challenging.
Yeah.
In different ways. Because the status quo is the status quo for a reason, and a lot of people like the status quo. They don't want it to change because they benefit from it. And so, you know, being able to like foster a space where we can talk about it and have those open conversations around, you know, why do we have this visceral reaction to change, and reflecting on, you know, our roles and our privileges. That has always been important, because no matter what, there will always be people who don't want change, right? And now with, like you said, all the different laws that are changing, you know, every administration, we experience different things too in this line of work. So, it presents different challenges every year, but it's something that I always just enjoy doing, because I get to also be a witness to people that are having a change of heart as well, and are getting that aha moment of like, whoa, I did not realize that that's my role, and that I need to also change, and I also need to reflect on this bias that I had no idea I even had. So that's always been very powerful to witness.
And I think you saying that speaks to the nature of change being something gradual. And even if you just reach one mind, one heart, like one soul to evolve, that is part of the wave. And then one by one, it starts to happen, you know? And that's also what we want audiences to take away. Share the story, and one by one, we start to subconsciously and do the work in our everyday lives. Let's get to work, y'all.